So following on from Jennifer's presentation, what I wanted to do was present to you a little bit about our unified sports program and how we've seen it being used to good effect to reduce youth sport dropout. So for those of you who don't already know what unified sports is, it is an inclusive program that's offered in Special Olympics where players with and without intellectual disabilities train and compete on a team together. And really the purpose of it is that it is a quick path to social inclusion, to friendship, and that's the primary motivation of unified sports. And some of the data we have around unified sports already, you'll see in the top right of the screen there, looking at the athletes. So we refer to the participants with intellectual disabilities as athletes and those without as partners. So the athletes, over 80% of them report having more friends without intellectual disabilities after participating in unified sports. They report exercising more. And the partners without intellectual disabilities, almost 80% of those report having a much better understanding of people with intellectual disabilities. But what I also want to draw your attention to is the big 94 in the top left of the screen. So 94% and 91% respectively of athletes and partners together report that they feel healthier after participating in unified sports, but also that their sports skills are improving. And I think that's a really important factor because sometimes we focus on the area of inclusion and we forget that there is actually a sports benefit associated with unified sports. So I wanted to share with you a case study from a youth soccer team in the US. And the reason I'm focusing on this example in the US is that we typically had unified sports in the United States operating in a school environment. And this is an example of a community-based program, which I think has wide implications around the world. So it's Holden Youth Soccer, which is based in Massachusetts. And they decided to establish a unified sports team about 2 years ago and focused on the age group of 12 to 15 years old for two reasons. One, it's a standard age group for Special Olympics, so that increases access to competition. But also that was that age group where they were seeing there was a large drop off of the players without intellectual disabilities within the club. So particularly focusing on those players, as I said, many of them were at risk of dropout, and this provided an opportunity for them to continue to play sport without that very highly competitive elite tracking youth sport, and gave them an opportunity to still also do something what they felt that was meaningful in their community. For the players without intellectual disabilities, there were two real main categories of players. There were those who didn't have a suitable competitive program and as a result had dropped out of sport participation. And then there were those players who were participating in top soccer, which is a station-to-station skill-based program, and really needed an opportunity to gradually transition into a team environment. And the benefits were not just for the players involved, but for the clubs and for Special Olympics, there was a huge benefit. So from the club perspective, this was a great opportunity for them to promote values of inclusion and acceptance within the club environment. As I said, to retain or even regain some players that had dropped out. And in terms of supporting particularly the players with intellectual disability, it gave them access to Special Olympics coaches who were specifically trained to do this, but also access to competitions that were specifically tailored for inclusive teams. And of course, very importantly for any club, it gave them an opportunity to access additional funding to support this programming. For Special Olympics, again, focusing on the idea of promoting inclusion and acceptance, but also giving access, which can often be a huge problem in Special Olympics, to training facilities, to club infrastructure, and to sport technical coaches. And of course, expanding the presence of Special Olympics in the local community. So I wanted to share just two quick examples of where this particular team of 14 players, where there was a really significant impact. So in two players in particular, and I've called them Brian and Charlie, not their real names, both had played school football in their elementary school days, but unfortunately had dropped out because they really had reached a point where they were no longer able to keep up, both from a sport technical perspective, but also socially with their peers without intellectual disabilities. And what Unified Sports did was offer them an opportunity to play in a more supportive environment and to continue to develop both socially, but also in terms of their football skills at their own pace with coaches who are specifically trained to support their additional needs. And in a really, really positive turn of events, both of those players have now actually rejoined their regional competitive high school programs. So playing in a mainstream league with mainstream teammates. So really positive outcome there. And then the second was looking at some of the players without intellectual disabilities. And I mentioned previously that these are the cohort of kids that we've heard talked about over and over again at that transition, that school transition, that are at high risk of dropout. And in most of the cases of the players in this team, they were at a level that they were unfortunately no longer maybe making the cut on the competitive teams, or were no longer interested in that highly competitive environment. And Unified Sports gave them that chance to continue to play sport that they loved, but just that they felt they were no longer fitting into, but also making a really meaningful contribution to their peers and to their local community. But above all else, it gave them an opportunity to stay fit, stay healthy, and stay engaged in sport. So again, a very positive outcome here, where players who would otherwise have left this sport and potentially left sport altogether are now still playing. So what's next for us in terms of unified sports, and particularly in developmental sports that Jennifer referenced earlier? We of course want to continue to engage more and more players with and without intellectual disabilities through age and developmentally appropriate sports. As Jennifer mentioned, we are focusing on some work with Paracoach at the moment to develop some coach training and coach education resources, specifically targeting youth sport age groups. And then finally, and I was heartened by Ken's comments earlier that a number of years back, they lacked the data to really support this trend that they were seeing of greater retention of players. We obviously need to continue to research this to really understand how unified sports does and can in the future help us to retain and regain youth players, both with and without intellectual disabilities. And I hope I've got us back-ish on time. Sergio, thanks very much.